Live from London, this is BBC News. Live scenes in Israel as a convoy carrying the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages released by Hamas in Gaza crosses the border. Hamas says the bodies include those of a mother and her 2 children. This is the scene in Tel Aviv where people carrying Israeli flags have filled Hostages Square after the bodies were transferred. Donald Trump is condemned for calling President Zelensky a dictator as the US president intensifies his criticism of the Ukrainian leader.
He refuses to have elections, is low in the real Ukrainian polls. I mean, how can you be high with every city is being demolished? A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left.
The parents of a 9-year-old girl who was killed in the Southport attack tell the BBC about plans for a memorial playground at their daughter's former school. Hello and welcome, I'm Samantha Simmons. The remains of what Hamas says are 4 hostages it held in Gaza are on their way to Israel's National Centre of Forensic Medicine for identification. They crossed the border in convoy around an hour ago. This is the first time Hamas has released the bodies of hostages since the ceasefire. The bodies are believed to be those of Shiri Bibas and her 2 sons, Kafir, who is 9 months old, and 4-year-old Ariel, the youngest people kidnapped in October 2023. The children's father, Yarden, was released by Hamas earlier this month, and this is footage of him being greeted by his family members at the time. Will also return today is thought to be the veteran peace activist Oded Lifshitz, who was 84 and whose British daughter has been a prominent campaigner for their release. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says the families have been updated and will be officially notified upon completion of the identification process, which could take several hours. He said in a statement, "Our hearts are with them at this difficult hour." Red Cross officials received the bodies from Hamas in Khan Yunis in a staged, managed handover before taking them away in convoy and handing them to the Israeli military. Well, we've been following live pictures of the convoy as it travels through Israel, from southern Israel to Jaffa, to the National Forensic Unit there. We've seen pictures of people lining the streets en route to pay their respects, many holding Israeli flags. As I say, they are en route to the Forensic Centre and people are waiting in Hostages Square. They're carrying the Israeli flags as they wait for formal identification. We did have a statement from the Bibas family who, when the news came from Hamas that the bodies of their family members were to be released, said, "We have been in turmoil following Hamas spokesperson's announcement about the planned return of our Shiri, Ariel and Kafir as part of the hostages remains release phase." They said, "We want to make it clear we are aware of these reports. We have not yet received any official confirmation. Until we receive definitive confirmation, our journey," they said, "is not over," and they've called for privacy at this very difficult time. Well, this scene in Hostages Square where friends and relatives are awaiting official news. A very sombre and difficult day for Israel, the Bibas family, and the images of them when they were taken on October the 7th has been seared into the Israeli consciousness, and there had remained hope that they may be alive, even though Hamas said many months ago that they had been killed in an Israeli airstrike, but there hadn't been any independent verification of that, and certainly something that the Israeli military were not willing to confirm. Well, our Middle East regional editor Sebastian Usher has been following this morning's developments.
This is a day of mourning, a day of unalloyed sorrow in Israel, a day that people have been bracing themselves for. They knew that at some point in this first phase of a ceasefire, there would be bodies of hostages who had died in captivity but would be handed over by Hamas, and that is what happened today. Hamas staged a ceremony in Khan Yunis in Gaza amongst the devastation there that now is so much a part of the devastated landscape of Gaza. They had a platform once more where a member of the Red Cross who was to receive the bodies came up, signed papers with a member of Hamas, a masked member of Hamas. Above them, there was a poster of Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, a caricature showing him with blood on his mouth and fangs and accusing him of being responsible for the deaths of these hostages, for their murder. Hamas had said a long time ago now that these three members of the Bibas family, Shiri Bibas, the mum, and her two children, Ariel, who was 4, and Kafir, who was 9 months, had died in what they said was an Israeli strike after they'd been taken captive, just a month after they'd been taken captive. Israel had never confirmed that. The family had still held out some hope that this might not be the case. The same applies to the 4th hostage who has been returned today, according to Hamas, Oded Lifshitz, a man in his 80s who was a former journalist and a well-known peace activist. Their bodies were contained in coffins that Hamas handed over to the Red Cross. The Red Cross had called for a private and a dignified event. I don't think the privacy was there. There were screens that Hamas put up, but I don't think that they obscured the view of those coffins. On each one of those coffins, the face of one of those hostages was placed. They were then taken by the Red Cross to a point where Israel picked them up. There's been a ceremony at which the chief military rabbi performed prayers over their coffins. There are now people lining the streets along the route that will take the bodies of the 4 hostages who've been returned in coffins to the hospital where a forensic identification will take place, which might take many hours. Until then, the Israeli government won't formally identify them as those on the list that Hamas provided. But I think the hope that there still was, the small hope that the families were clinging to, that the Israeli public was clinging to, is now at an end. And the people who are along those streets waving Israeli flags are there in mourning, an acceptance that the 2 young Bibas children, their mother and Oded Lifshitz, have died, and that the hope that there was that they might have survived is now at an end. That grief, that sorrow will continue throughout the day in a moment that I think is bringing Israel together, bringing the families of the hostages, bringing the politicians together in mourning. But there's still division over where this goes next.
I just want to show you the latest images released by the Israeli military, and this is of 4 coffins draped in Israeli flags with military officers paying their respects there as they received those bodies and they were returned to Israeli hands after 16 months since those bodies were taken, and many hopes that they may have survived, but although we don't have a confirmation from the Israeli military yet, Hamas have said these are the bodies of the youngest and oldest hostages taken on October the 7th, Oded Lifshitz, who was 84, and Shiri Bibas and her 2 young sons, who were just 9 months and 4 years old when they were abducted. Now to Ukraine, and European leaders have given their backing to the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky after President Trump said he was a dictator who'd done a terrible job. Sir Keir Starmer phoned Mr Zelensky last night to offer his support. In a deepening rift, Mr Trump claimed Ukraine started the war with Russia and that his Ukrainian counterpart was a dictator because he didn't hold elections last year. President Zelensky's term expired last May, but voting was legally suspended because of the war. Meanwhile, the Kremlin says any British plan to send troops to Ukraine as part of a potential peacekeeping mission would be unacceptable for Russia, and that it was monitoring statements by British Prime Minister Keir Starmer with concern. Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said the proposal was unacceptable because it would involve forces from a NATO member state and therefore have ramifications for Russia's own security.
We are certainly following all these reports most closely. We're following all the sometimes contradictory official statements of the Europeans on this matter. This is a matter of our concern because we're talking about the possible eventual sending of military contingents of NATO countries to Ukraine. This takes on a completely different meaning from the point of view of our security. So this topic is important for us. We are following it very closely. I would like to remind you of the words of our Minister of Foreign Affairs that, of course, the deployment of military contingents of countries that are members of NATO on the territory of Ukraine cannot be acceptable for us.
Merlin Thomas looks now at the implications of the row between President Trump and President Zelensky.
A deepening rift between the United States and Ukraine. After President Trump spent the day attacking Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, calling him a dictator, the US leader doubled down on his comments at a conference in Florida.
He's pretty easy. A dictator without elections. Zelensky better move fast or he's not going to have a country left. Got to move fast because that war is going in the wrong direction. In the meantime, we're successfully negotiating an end to the war with Russia.
Speaking to reporters on board Air Force One, President Trump was asked if he trusts Russia is negotiating in good faith.
I do. I think the Russians want to see the war end. And I do. I really do. But I think they have the cards a little bit because, you know, they've taken a lot of territory. So they have the cards.
In a phone call with Mr. Zelensky last night, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer reaffirmed his support to Ukraine and gave his backing to efforts to achieve long-lasting peace. In response, President Zelensky wrote on X, "We will never forget the respect the British people have shown for Ukraine and our citizens." President Trump's scathing comments will have been welcomed by Moscow. For many, Mr. Trump's words echo Kremlin talking points, who, for so long, have sought to change power in Ukraine.
We believe that since his legitimacy has come to an end May last year, he should have elections. Since we do not see how we can negotiate with him something, because if he will put his signature under any kind of agreement, and tomorrow he will not be elected as the president, so this piece of paper will have not much of value.
But Mr. Zelensky was democratically elected in 2019, before the war. His 5-year term was due to come to an end in May 2024. But since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, elections have been legally postponed. The war of words between the leaders began after Mr. Zelensky said the US president was living in a disinformation space governed by Moscow. President Zelensky is caught at a fragile moment. After nearly 3 years of brutal war, he needs all the support he can get. But it's clear that it won't be from President Trump. Merlin Thomas, BBC News, Washington.
Well, our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg had this update on how Moscow is reacting to the latest comments from President Trump.
Well, it will come as no surprise to you, I think, to hear that this is all going down very well in Moscow. The Russians are very pleased, very confident. They love hearing Donald Trump's criticism of President Zelensky. On the front page of the Izvestia newspaper today, there's a big photograph of Vladimir Putin looking very happy, smiling, talking about how well the US-Russia talks have been going, the talks in Saudi Arabia earlier this week. And there's a big article in the government paper today, the Rossiyskaya Gazeta, which talks about Donald Trump demanding elections in Ukraine and concluding, the paper says, Washington has started the process of the destruction of Zelensky's image. Of course the Russians are pleased, because we've gone from a situation where there was an American president, Joe Biden, who called Vladimir Putin a murderous dictator, to a situation where we have an American president, Donald Trump, who now calls the president of Ukraine a dictator without elections, and an American president who appears happy to embrace Russian narratives on the war in Ukraine and to spread those narratives, who doesn't criticize at all Vladimir Putin for Vladimir Putin's full-scale invasion of Ukraine 3 years ago. And on top of that, an American president who is picking fights with America's traditional allies and weakening transatlantic ties. So if you put all of that together, that kind of explains why Vladimir Putin is smiling in that photograph on the front page of a Russian newspaper today.
Steve Rosenberg there. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Now let's return to the criticisms that President Donald Trump has made of Ukraine's president. Mr. Trump criticised Mr. Zelensky, saying he had done a terrible job and claimed he refuses to have elections in Ukraine. Zelensky's 5-year term was due to end in May 2024, but elections have been suspended since martial law was declared after Russia's invasion. Well, I spoke to Maria Zolkina, head of regional security and conflict studies at the Democratic Initiatives Foundation, and I asked her about her view of Zelensky and US Special Envoy Kellogg's meeting today.
I do believe that there might be some changes, at least in Kellogg's personal position, because there are very harsh mood now in Kyiv in reaction to what we have been witnessing last week in terms of meetings between US and Russia, in terms of all the messages coming from Trump and his counterparts. But I don't honestly believe that Kellogg is one of the central figures here, one of the central persons to form the position of the US. Unfortunately, there were hopes that he will be the central person, just accumulating the information and giving some feedback to President Trump when he was Kit Kellogg was selected for this position, but now we see that everyone, Marco Rubio, Waltz, Vance, and Trump himself have much more weight in setting up an agenda for relations with Russia and making an impact on Russia-Ukraine war than Kit Kellogg potentially will have.
What's your assessment of how Donald Trump's comments and this meeting that he had in Saudi Arabia, well, not he had, but the administration had, with the Russian foreign minister earlier this week, what impact is it going to have on Russia's strategy, do you think?
I do think that we should assess this as a kind of strategy rather than separate commands or tactical reaction of Trump. This is a strategy when US is not any longer interested in supporting European security, not only Ukrainian security on the ground. US is we have been witnessing like US is disappearing as the main partner in military and political partner of Ukraine in this international coalition which supported Ukraine. Trump has significantly changed, and that's the biggest and the worst outcome of his actions so far. He has completely changed the status of Russia. Russia, who has lost politically and militarily and was not longer considered after 2022 as a global power or even as a powerful regional power, now is back. So it was Trump who ended the era of Russia's international isolation from the democratic world. And impact will be not just for Ukraine now, which is neglected and ignored while negotiations are being started without taking into account the position of Ukraine and the very impact of this for Ukraine's existence, I would say. So the stakes are very high here, okay. But the impact will witness Europe, which is pretty concerned, a bit too late, but still waking up now.
Yeah. Maria Zolkina there. Let's bring you some of the day's other news now. The leaders of two of Germany's main parties have held a televised debate ahead of Sunday's election. The poll comes as the popularity of the anti-immigration AfD party is surging. The Conservative Friedrich Merz and centre-left Chancellor Olaf Scholz both focused on immigration and the economy. Wildlife vets in Australia have begun euthanising 38 false killer whales that have become stranded on a remote beach in Tasmania. The animals were part of a pod of more than 150 that were beached on the island's northwestern coast. Rescue efforts were hampered by the challenging terrain and weather conditions. In their first broadcast interview since their daughter was killed, the parents of Alice Aguiar have said that she was born to be a star. Alice, Elsie Stankham and BB King were killed in the Southport knife attack last July. Both Alice and BB had been pupils at Churchtown Primary School, which is now planning to build a playground in memory of the two girls, as Sarah Campbell reports.
Sergio and Alex, Alice's parents, returning to the school she loved without her for the first time.
It's good to see you both. Thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you. Thank you.
The head teacher, Ginny Payne, has been working with them on plans for a new playground, which will include a space her parents know Alice would have enjoyed.
Here, the stage. Yeah, definitely. She started dancing when she was 16 months. She joined to baby ballet, then she was in the academy. So, yeah, I think she was born to be a star. Yeah, that would be her favorite part. for us it's really important to make this happen. Yeah, she would be happy, and I'm sure she's proud of us doing this.
The current concrete space will be transformed with climbing frames, an indoor-outdoor library and a performance area, all in memory of Alice and Bibi, who also attended the school.
I think it is really important. For the children, it's joy, it's fun, it's positivity. And where you do something together, that feeling of togetherness, of community, of look what I have done, I'm so proud of this, I have helped create this, that will bring the positivity that we need.
Go! Sprint! That's it! Go! High knees!
As part of the fundraising effort to pay for the playground, Sergio and Ginny are in training for the London Marathon. Both the school and Alice's parents are determined the girls should never be forgotten.
It's a difficult question, but when you think about Alice, what do you think of?
Happiness, kindness, everything good. Yeah.
She always have a smile, because I always tell her, doesn't matter what's happened, try put your smile. It's the most important. She always have a big smile.
Yeah.
Sarah Campbell, BBC News, Southport.
The president of South Korea has gone on trial for insurrection, becoming the first sitting president to face a criminal court. He's accused of plotting to stay in power through unconstitutional means following his short-lived bid to impose martial law in December. Mr. Yoon was present for the preliminary hearing but didn't offer a plea. The BBC's Rachel Lee has more details from Seoul.
South Korea's suspended President Yoon Suk-yeol's criminal trial began this morning but ended in just 13 minutes with his legal team refusing to confirm whether he acknowledges the charges. Now, the trial is focused on allegations that Mr. Yoon illegally declared martial law and attempted to stay in power through unconstitutional means. And prosecutors revealed that they have over 70,000 pages of evidence and requested at least 2 to 3 hearings per week. And separately, his detention cancellation hearing also lasted 70 minutes, but Mr. Yoon did not make any direct statements and no immediate ruling was issued. Now, his lawyers are arguing that his arrest was politically motivated, while prosecutors insist his detention is necessary, given the severity of the charges.
And remind us of what happened back in December and led to this case.
Right. So Yoon is facing both a criminal trial and an impeachment process over allegations that he attempted to cling to power through unconstitutional means, as I said. And prosecutors have charged him with leading an insurrection, claiming he orchestrated a military crackdown despite no actual national emergency. And he is accused of unlawfully declaring martial law and ordering the arrest of opposition politicians. And witnesses have also testified that Yoon personally instructed security forces to detain lawmakers and also prevent them from entering the National Assembly. And while his defense argues that the martial law declaration was a legitimate government decision, the prosecution insists that it was an illegal attempt to suppress political opposition and remain in power.
Let's return to our top story now, and the scenes live in Israel with crowds of people lining the streets there as the convoy continues, returning the bodies of 4 Israeli hostages released by Hamas several hours ago now. And back on Israeli soil, they are the first bodies of Israeli hostages released since the ceasefire came into effect on January the 19th. And Hamas have said that they are the bodies of the Bibas family, Shiri Bibas, and her 2 young sons, who were just 9 months old and 4 years old when they were abducted on October the 7th, 2023, held in captivity since then. There were images released by Hamas on the day that they were taken of terrified Shiri Bibas, who was 32 at the time, being kidnapped with her children from near Oz. Those pictures have just moved now, but we can show you the scenes live in Hostages Square as well. This is in Tel Aviv, as people are also gathering to mark the return of these bodies. The fourth body is that of Oded Lifshitz, who was 84, a veteran peace activist and a founding member of the Nir Oz kibbutz, from where he was abducted alongside his wife Yocheved. She was taken separately that day. She was released by Hamas some 16 days later, and she has campaigned tirelessly along with her daughter Sharon for the release of her husband and Sharon's father. But it does appear, according to Hamas, that he has died while in captivity, Oded Lifshitz, alongside the Shiri Bibas and her 2 young children. Although we are waiting for official confirmation, the bodies are being returned to a forensic site in Israel, in Jaffa, where they will be formally identified. But this is an extremely difficult day for Israel, who have been painfully waiting for news of this family and hoping that they would be returned alive. There were reports by Hamas many months ago that they had been killed in an Israeli airstrike, but that was never confirmed or verified by the Israeli military. And we've seen officers saluting the convoy as those bodies are returned to Israel. We've also saw a short while ago images of the 4 coffins, and those images released by the Israeli military, draped in Israeli flags, while Hamas handed over the bodies of these hostages as part of the Gaza ceasefire deal. And the armed group have said that they are the bodies of Oded Lifshitz, Shiri Bibas and her 2 young sons. But we are waiting for official confirmation. We've seen many people lining the streets in Israel to pay their own respects and mark what is a very difficult day in Israel. While the deceased captives have now arrived at the Israeli National Center for Forensic Medicine for identification, according to the Israeli Ministry of Health.